Story 1. A wealthy client of an organization shouted at me that affluent individuals should not have to wait in line with ordinary people. Story 2. Hey boss, I need the day off in a few days. My grandma just passed away. Well, tell your grandma to stop dying. Story 3. When I worked in retail, I was working the register and addressed an older woman as ma'am. She became very upset with me and said not to call her ma'am. She indicated that the days of slavery were over and that she wasn't my slave master. I was caught off guard. Another woman behind her just gave me a warm, reassuring smile and shook her head, notifying me not to engage. Story 4. About 10 years ago, the girlfriend of a good friend of mine and I got into a heated discussion about various topics. We were drinking. I had a 9-year-old German Shepherd at the time. She said, and I quote, "If you don't quit trying to convince me I'm wrong, I'll kill your dog and string her guts on your windshield." I was in disbelief that someone could be so cruel. Fast forward a week later, I told my buddy that his girlfriend needed to apologize. She absolutely refused, her logic being, I was drunk, and if I don't remember saying it, I didn't say it. I'm not responsible for those actions. Keep in mind there were about 5 other people in the room when she initially made the comment. Story 5. My ex-wife told me, "Every time I know your parents are driving here, I pray they die in a car accident." Story 6. As a teenager, I was overweight and frequently bullied for it. When I was about 14, I told my mother that the Hollister polo I had tried on did not fit. Her response was that they do not want overweight people wearing their clothes. Over 20 years later, she claims she has always supported body positivity for men. At the same time, she denies ever making that remark to me. No apology has ever been given, even with the "if I said that" preface. It still hurts. Story 7. When I was about 15 or 16, due to financial circumstances, my dad ended up moving abroad to make money. I then moved to another country a few years later, and when I was about 24, he very unexpectedly died. I was 15 or 16 when I last saw him, and it completely broke my heart. It still does. Anyway, after I came back from compassionate leave, a coworker said to me, "I was very close to my mom, so I know how it feels to lose a parent. At least you hadn't seen him in a while, so it wasn't as bad as me losing my mom." I was floored and so shocked I had no response. It's not a competition. What an insensitive and unnecessary comment. Story 8. Men cannot be raped, said by a man. Then a woman in class disagreed with him and he responded, "Ugly women like you cannot be raped either." He was probably the worst person I have ever met, and he made these kinds of statements all the time. Story 9. It's when someone blamed my grandfather for being too good to his daughter who died of cancer. Let him be, he is suffering enough. Story 10. We've always shown you respect. This is coming from a boss who didn't know my name for 2 years and just addressed me as stupid. She told me I was too stupid to do anything but run production, laughed at me after I returned to work following a suicide attempt, and when I finally got a promotion, I received the work, the responsibility, and the blame when things went wrong, but her friend got the pay and perks. She also told me that I could not attend my brother's funeral, saying the job was more important. Story 11. My older sister said to me, "When are you going to get over brain surgery?" At that time, I had a series of 3 brain surgeries. The last one was a lobectomy that caused a total personality change, and I no longer tolerated her behavior. I used to be quiet, but after brain surgery, don't mess with me. I woke up a stranger to myself. That was hard enough. I have bad headaches and other issues, so brain surgery will always be a part of me. She didn't like the new me. Story 12. I won my youth group's baking competition when I was around 13 or 14, and my prize was that my expenses were waived for the next youth trip. I had been struggling badly with anxiety, depression, and social anxiety, a fact that my family and youth leaders were aware of and supporting me in dealing with. It was hard to allow myself to feel proud and good about that win and taking the chance on entering, but I did feel good about myself. About a week later, my brother and I were arguing about something trivial. We both said immature, hurtful teenage things. At one heated point, he blurted out, "You know you only won because everyone felt sorry for you, right?" It was like a bucket of cold water on both of us. because he immediately and sincerely apologized, and we both cooled off after that, but it stuck with me. Story 13. When I was 14, I had my first job at McDonald's. You know how sometimes if something costs $3.05 and you give them $5.05 so you can get two singles instead of the change? I mean, that is such a simple thing, but there was still a time when you learned that. This guy had an order that was like $5.25, and he gave me $10.25. I kept trying to give him the quarter back because I didn't realize what he meant. I mean, the 10 was enough in my mind. The guy got really angry and started screaming at me. He said, "Better keep this job, kid, because this is all you're ever going to be." I was 14 years old. Story 14. After receiving a D in a college course, the next semester the teacher encountered me in the hallways and told me that they should have failed me in the course I took. I replied by saying it is too late for that, so why make that comment? Just to tear me down? Story 15. I was in my third year of college and finally able to take some elective courses I had been wanting to. The course I was in was basically a feminism and women's studies kind of class. On the first day, we were introducing ourselves and had to say something we always wanted to accomplish in life. Ever since I was little, I have always wanted to be a mom, and I have always loved kids. I said this. The professor replied, "Well, at least you're pretty," and moved on. I was left speechless. I didn't even realize what she said at first. Story 16. When I was 16, my grandpa died. When I called my manager at PetSmart to let them know when the funeral was and that I needed that day off, my manager just sort of scoffed and said, "Do you expect anything else to happen this week?" I was too young and timid to say what I should have said, but I just sort of mumbled no while trying not to cry. I ended up telling my main boss about what she said, and they made her apologize to me. Story 17. I used to work at Walgreens. A woman walked in and asked me where the Hanukkah cards were. We had 2 entire aisles for cards, and employees do not stock them. A separate person from Hallmark comes in to take care of it. So I said, "I think they're in this aisle," and started walking towards them. In an extremely condescending tone, she immediately said, "I don't need you to think, I need you to know." I was so baffled by the response that I just pointed at them and walked away. Literally, never in my life, before or since, has someone been that pointlessly rude to me. Story 18. Not too long ago, I was asked to present a training session or workshop one afternoon to one of my clients, all of whom were local counselors. You would have thought they were reasonably polite people. I came in to do the session. About an hour into the 3-hour workshop, and fortunately nearing the first break, we had a really good discussion with about 60% of the room providing input and feedback. We had made 2 of about 4 or 5 decisions that needed to be made, with engagement good overall. Only for one of the counselors to put their hand up and then proceed to tell the entire room that I was boring everyone to death, and they would walk out if they had to listen to much more. We immediately cut to break. The remaining counselors were very apologetic, and I was asked to rush through the rest of the slides as quickly as possible after the break, which meant I just talked at them for 45 minutes with no engagement, and the decisions that needed to be made were all pushed back to another time. He packed up his things and walked out anyway about 15 minutes into that second session. Bearing in mind I had been specifically asked to cover all of this, including that length of session with all of the topics requested, I cried a bit on the way home as I was a few weeks pregnant and quite hormonal, plus in shock at having been spoken to like that. Needless to say, I haven't returned to that client. It may not be much in the grand scheme of things, but it is absolutely not worth my time to be spoken to like that. And I know I am a good presenter too, evidenced by the rest of the room being engaged. Oh well. Story 19. As a white passing Hispanic person, it's surprising what people think is acceptable to say about minorities when no one is listening. Or that I'd be fine with hearing since I don't look stereotypically Hispanic. So many racist jokes are said in all seriousness, then they act like I'm the issue if I call them out. The best one I've heard is from someone I met. "Wait, you're Mexican? Let me ask you, growing up, if you wanted to see your dad, did you hide his food stamps under his work boots? Or was he just gone?" Story 20. When I was 12, hanging out with a group of friends, one girl who had always been so sweet to me interrupted me mid-sentence to say, "Every time you open your mouth, I like you less." No one else in the group said anything. They all just stared. It was the most humiliating moment of my life. I do not think I will ever forget it. Story 21. I worked at a grocery store when I was younger. One of our cashiers was deaf. He was a really nice guy and excellent at his job. Unfortunately, a certain subset of the customers seemed to get pleasure from abusing him. The worst incident I ever witnessed was an elderly woman, who appeared to be over 80 years old, screaming that she didn't want any defectives checking her out. Story 22. An ex would tell me, "Good luck finding someone to put up with all of your issues," seemingly to manipulate me into believing no one else would ever love me. Well, one day I left him and found my now husband 6 days later. We immediately started dating. My ex wasn't happy about that. After so many fake breakups for attention, I was kind of past caring. Story 23. When I was about 20 years old, I slipped into a depression and ended up being unable to work or leave the house. Eventually, I began searching for a therapist, which meant making a list with 100 numbers, calling them all, and hoping 2 or 3 would actually call back. Mind you, this is a rough thing to do when you're severely depressed, but I did it. One day, I was woken up by my phone ringing. One of the therapists had called me back, but something about her voice was off. She sounded incredibly annoyed. She asked me what I wanted from her. I explained the situation, that I could not work anymore and needed help. "Yes, but what do you want from me?" Like I said, I cannot work and, "Yeah, I got that, but what do you want from me?" I do not understand. "Do you want to go to therapy here? Or do you want me to help you stay on sick leave?" I was speechless about what she said and how she said it. This woman did not even know me, but she was so hostile towards me. The funny thing is, instead of crying or whatever, I just said, "You know what? This is not going to work out," and hung up on her. Felt so good. Story 24. A random encounter during college. I had been spending the summer on campus taking an intensive course in the German language and working part-time in a research lab. As a way to relax from that work, I had picked up a kit for a scale model of Carnarvon Castle and then spent a month building it. On the day when this incident happened, I was carrying this completed model out to my grandparents. A middle-aged woman started a conversation while I was waiting on a commuter train platform. Her questions seemed normal. What is this? What is the history of the castle? Where had I found the kit? In the gift shop of a local museum. Then, without warning, she walked away with the remark, "I guess it's better than playing video games." Yes, I was 18 years old, but that casual ageism was really grating. In the moment, I watched her leave in shocked silence. Then I made a private vow never to treat a teenager that way. Now, getting closer to her age, I wonder what her children endured. She felt comfortable tossing a jab like that at a complete stranger. A person like that is usually worse at home. Story 25. We were at a Spice Girls concert in 2007 and my ex was acting miserable. I asked him why and he responded, "I just wanted you to know what it is like not to get everything you want for once in your life." I wish I had left him then and there, but it was sadly only one of the many casually cruel things to come out of that man's mouth over the 16 years we were together. Rot in disappointment, Nick. Story 26. Completely out of the blue at a lunch with half a dozen of us. Someone said, "If I had to pick one person here, I would assume Dana is bulimic." Dana immediately bursts into tears and leaves the table. Story 27. When my twin brother died, it was totally devastating. I left my line cooking job on the West Coast to attend his funeral on the East. Naturally, when I came back a week later, I wasn't in the best headspace. I forgot to pull some things from the freezer for a party a couple of us were catering, and the owner tore into me. Okay, I messed up, apologized, and tried to move on. That night, I overheard my kitchen manager talking to the owner, saying they couldn't wait until I left because my depression was bothering them. Since I put in my 2 weeks over the catering incident, I was going to no call, no show, but felt bad about it, so I called at 11 a.m. the next day. My shift was at 4. I told them I was not coming. My manager was trying to be cordial, but I heard the owner going crazy in the back, saying a bunch of unhinged things. I heard him tell my manager to tell me, I hope he stays miserable over his dead brother forever. I was in total disbelief that he said that. Forget that guy. Story 28. When a customer asked me what vibrator I would recommend, I told him that I don't know because I don't use them. He replied, "Oh, so you just have a guy do it instead?" Who says that to anyone, let alone a complete stranger? Story 29. I am from a different country than my boyfriend. When we were going to have a baby, my mother-in-law asked him something like, "Are you going to buy normal clothes for the baby or some of your nationality's fashion?" Mind you, our cultures are similar, and we have pretty much the same clothing shops available in our countries. My in-laws are always nice to me when I am around, but since I heard this comment, I doubt if they are nice because they like me or just because they do not want to mess up the relationship with their son. Story 30. I confided in my high school boyfriend that I struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder after a sexual assault. It was so hard to just walk in public without having a flashback or being stuck on the school bus every day. It was challenging to navigate all my triggers on a daily basis while trying to control the revolving door of panic attacks. I lost so much weight that my hair was falling out. It was difficult to eat since touching my mouth was a strong trigger for a flashback. I was diagnosed by a doctor, as if I was not making this up in the least. My life was an actual hell at that time. He got so angry. He threw his chair down and, with his finger in my face, yelled, "You take that word out of your mouth. My grandpa was in the war and has actual, real post-traumatic stress disorder. Do you know how disrespectful that is to veterans? You can't get post-traumatic stress disorder from everyday life. You can only get it from the war." He yelled so loud. He was so unreasonably angry. I really couldn't believe it. I just wanted to share my reality, be open with my new boyfriend so he knows what I'm dealing with. I can still see his face turning red like a tomato as he was yelling at me. You could almost see steam coming from his ears. Story 31. My mom told me and my 2-year-old that my brother Kyle is her favorite son. I still cannot believe that she actually said that to my daughter. I never thought I would be limiting my child's interactions with their grandma, but here we are. Story 32. I was once dating a girl who was very abusive towards me and was a raging narcissist. We were at a park just sitting and chatting. The conversation soon turned into an argument about how badly she was treating me. I was making very compelling arguments, and when she felt cornered and defeated, she said, "If you do not stop talking, I will scream right here." Yes, she was the worst. Story 33. I must have been around 6 or 7, and my school seemingly had this reading comprehension test going on for each grade and division. Over the course of a few weeks, each student would get called down for their own individual testing with a teacher tasked with the responsibility of conducting these tests. I was finally called down for my test one morning, and the teacher was less than pleasant toward me. She seemed like someone who either despised her job, despised being around kids, or both. She gave me a quick rundown of the testing and then had me read out a long list of words within a time limit of about 2 minutes. To make a long story short, she berated me for not being able to pronounce certain words, yelled at me for trying to work through them, and then told me, "Your peers did so much better than you. You need to step it up. Tears won't help you." Yes, I was too young to realize it, but that affected me much deeper than I thought. Story 34. A coworker was telling me gossip about my boss and how she lost her virginity very young. She said, "Yeah, well, she grew up on the native reservation. You realize that's what they all do there, right?" Like, ma'am, I am native myself and happen to know my boss did not grow up on a reservation. Also, how do you have this information and why must I know this about my boss's virginity? It was unbelievable and my last straw. I switched jobs the same week. The gossip was overpowering and very draining. Story 35. Once I was traveling with my ex-boyfriend and his mother. We had just had lunch and took a long drive. I began to feel nauseous and had to get out of the car because I was sick. When I returned, she said, "Well, at least you'll get thinner." I was also just recovering from bulimia. Story 36. I was driving a group of my sorority sisters and a friend of one of theirs back from a party when my sorority sister's friend told her to tell me to drive them to a bar. When I informed her she could talk directly to me, She sneered and said to my sorority sister, "Tell that troll I only speak to pretty girls. She needs to learn her place and do as she's told." What in the world was going through her mind when she said that? Story 37. I was in high school and I ran track for most of my life. I was being scouted by a few colleges for an athletic scholarship and was super excited. My then boyfriend told me he didn't know why I was even trying so hard to get a scholarship. It's not like I was going to go to the Olympics or anything. I was totally floored. That relationship didn't last much longer after that. Story 38. I only use Crayola, said to me by my parents' friend's child when he was over playing while our parents were chatting. Yeah, he was a spoiled little child, and he didn't want to get dirt all over his hands by touching my non-branded crayons. Story 39. My ex-boyfriend and I were thinking of getting takeout. I suggested Indian food. He laughed and asked me why he would want to eat food that smells. For context, I am South Asian. Story 40. A guy I worked with told me that I was nobody. Now, in the scheme of things and the context in which he said it, I was a nobody. I wasn't a manager or in any position of authority over him. I was just a worker like he was. He was a guy with a hugely overinflated ego, to the point that it had negatively impacted his life. He liked to try to knock people down to elevate himself. I was a nobody who had been with the company a lot longer than he had and knew what I was doing and how things worked or should work. Other people would ask me how to do things, and he couldn't handle it because he was so obviously just better than me. So he had to put me in my place in his mind. It was just so rude, and the disdain in his voice was strange. And no, I didn't let it get to me because I knew he was someone who blamed everyone but himself for his problems. I had to work with him, but I didn't have to respect him. Story 41. When my mom died, my aunt told me it was harder on her than it was for me because she had known my mom all her life. Story 42. I was 23, and my dog of 13 years was sick. I mentioned on my Sunday shift that if she wasn't better in the morning, I was going to call the veterinarian. She didn't make it. I suspect she had a stroke in the middle of the night. I was absolutely devastated. That dog was my child and my sister all in one. We grew up together. She was my 10th birthday gift. I stayed home for college instead of going abroad because I couldn't leave her behind. She was my entire world, and everyone knew it. I went to work on Tuesday, and a coworker asked how my dog was. I burst into tears and said she died in the night. I got back, "Well, aren't you glad you didn't have to spend the veterinarian money then?" Story 43. When I was just a teenager at my first job, this older employee told me that I was a good example of why to vote for abortion. Story 44. My dad died very unexpectedly, and we wanted to do an autopsy because the hospital had the cause listed as sudden death. Due to bureaucracy, it ended up taking 4 days before we could bury him. On the second day, I got a call from my dad's colleague. She went on a lengthy spiel about how disrespectful it was that we hadn't buried him already and how his soul was suffering instead of being reunited with God. Aside from the sheer audacity to say that to a grieving daughter, my dad was a strong atheist, and everyone who met him knew that. He made sure of it. Also, honorable mention to another colleague of my dad's, who insisted on giving a eulogy only to spend 15 minutes talking about the fact that his own parents are buried in the same cemetery and what a beautiful cemetery it is. Story 45. I am from Ukraine and I moved to the United States in 6th grade, to a city that has a lot of Russians. During the first period, the teacher announced my name and where I was from. I was seated next to a Russian boy, and the first thing he asked was, "Why did you all come here?" Implying that too many Ukrainians were coming to the United States, while that city had an 80% Russian population. I think that stuck with me because I was young, and it was my first experience in an American school. Later, the kids would scream, "Crimea is ours," and all that other imperialistic nonsense. I argued only once. Then I realized these people were mentally unhinged, and I just started fighting back every time they tried to humiliate me like that. I ended up being suspended for a month after a particularly bad fight. The whole staircase was covered in blood. The police were involved in all of that. My mom scared me to death after it happened, and then I tried my best to finish middle school without confrontations. Story 46. I was talking about criminology with someone I knew in university, and she started discussing how there are different types of rapists. She then said to me, for example, compensatory rapists rape people because they are pathetic, like you. I was utterly stunned by that. She also ended up sexually harassing me to the point that I stopped attending the class we had together and started avoiding extracurricular activities she was involved in as well. Story 47. My father introduced a cousin to the new pastor as the enemy because my cousin was younger, progressive, and not fully conforming to traditional expectations. This is a man my father babysat. He read bedtime stories to him. He was there at every milestone, graduation, and other significant events. My cousin has been at every Christmas, Thanksgiving, and Easter gathering at my father's house, all to be introduced as the enemy. Story 48. A few years ago, I worked for a consulting firm where the partners seemed to dislike me from day one. It was one of those jobs where you sit and wonder how or why you got hired. One day, I was working in my cubicle when one of the partners went into my coworker's cubicle adjacent to mine. I was sitting there, and I heard the partner say, "The bachelor's degree that I have is basically worthless." I wouldn't say it shocked me since I already knew that the guy didn't like me, but it was still very hurtful and depressing since I had left a job with a better boss to take that job. Story 49. A member of a social club was telling us about his brother losing his leg because of complications from diabetes. Another member said, "It sounds like he deserved it." Story 50. Minding my own business doing laundry in my building, the cleaning lady asked me if I was married or had ever been. I told her no. She said it would help if I were more attractive. Story 51. Got one from yesterday. My mother had a stroke last week. The disaster was averted. It was minor and she is home already, although she will have to make some needed life changes. I mentioned this to a coworker in the morning. That afternoon, we were in a meeting and he made a joke about someone having a stroke. Story 52. I was speaking with a customer who had a complaint about an offer they had received in the mail from our head office. At the end of the conversation, the customer wished me a long life. I was about to say thank you when he added, "And I hope you get dementia." I was utterly shocked that someone would wish a horrible disease upon me because they didn't like the marketing offer they received for free items. Later, I found out he had gone around and chewed out several other people. Karma kicked in when he got T-boned as he left our property, and he had to come back in groveling to ask for our help. Story 53. In first grade, one of my few friends at the time told me, "You are such a crybaby." I know it is tame compared to many other stories here, but this prompted years of me avoiding crying in front of people. I would feel a deep sense of shame any time it happened, which of course made things worse. It also contributed to social anxiety. I have had worse said to me since, but this exchange had the longest impact. Story 54. I moved to the other side of the world to be with my partner. No regrets. As soon as I got here, I did my best to integrate, went to school to learn the language, and be part of the culture. I also got a job, a challenging one, but it was a job. We decided we wanted to move out of our apartment to a house so we could extend our family. I have periods where I miss home and my family, and I know how to cope with it. One day, my mother-in-law told me I had to get over my homesickness and move on because I lived here now. Her next sentence was that our house isn't a home for her child and how much her child had given up by selling the apartment so we could move 15 minutes across town into our house. She also told me I'm not from their culture and I will never fit in. Story 55. My grandmother was in a parking lot. We had parked our car and got out, and there was a family by their car across the way settling a severely disabled child into a wheelchair. My grandmother, in her warm grandmotherly voice, exclaimed, "Now there is a case for euthanasia." Story 56. You do not really have any skills that would translate to the real world. This was from a customer whom I would occasionally meet up with for dinner. I did not really see much of him after that. Years later, I emailed him looking for advice on a project I was working on, and the email bounced back. When I searched his name to see if a new email address came up, I found out he was a card-carrying white supremacist with videos and everything. This explained why he never wanted to go to dinner in his own town and run into people who, unlike me, knew what a terrible person he was. Good riddance. Story 57. My friend died 6 months ago. He was beaten to death. He used to paint his nails black, and to remember him, my friends and I paint our nails black too sometimes. I have been struggling with marijuana and cocaine at the time, so I went to rehabilitation. On the second or third day, a new guy arrived. He was my age and was from Syria or so. When he saw my nails, he asked me, "Why do you paint your nails? Are you trying to be special or something?" I didn't answer him. He repeatedly asked me about it and why I wouldn't respond. He said that I wasn't a man if I painted my nails, and then he grabbed my finger and tried to rub the paint off my nail. I was on the first few days of being sober, so I was really irritable. I pushed his hand away and told him about my friend, that he had passed, and I was doing it to remember him. I didn't offend him in any way. Then he said, "Well, your friend didn't deserve anything else. God doesn't accept people like that, so he will hopefully burn in hell." The people standing by were as shocked as I was. Since we were in rehabilitation, I had to hold myself back from losing it on him, and a different boy told the nurse and he got kicked out immediately. I was in my room crying the whole day. I still think about that and why someone would say something like that and how someone could think that way. Story 58. I was working as an accounting clerk. The company was significantly behind in terms of technology. I suggested a better way to process payments. My manager told me that the tail does not wag the dog. Story 59. A couple of years back, I, a Puerto Rican and Welsh female, was talking to my grandfather, who is Puerto Rican, in Korean on the phone. When I ended the call, my friend said, "You are such a Koreaboo. Why are you so obsessed with the culture?" I tried to explain that my grandfather speaks Korean and lived there for 20 years, and that's why I learned the language. The ironic thing is that she is the real Koreaboo, or Asian Fisher. She tries to make herself look Asian in photos. Once claimed she was from Korea, she is from Israel, and insists that she is 45% Japanese. Another time, the same girl asked where my dad worked. I told her that my dad works for a company and that he goes to Korea for work every few months. She responded, "But he is white. First of all, how does my dad being white interfere with the company he works for? Second of all, that's just a weird statement." After these interactions, I genuinely felt ashamed for being able to speak Korean as a non-Korean person or listen to Korean bands that I had been listening to literally my whole life. They were both such strange interactions, and I felt extremely uncomfortable around her for a couple of months. Story 60. I am a librarian. One day, I called a patron to remind her that the book she had checked out was overdue. She asked to renew it. I politely told her I could not because we had a very long list of holds. She asked what the overdue fine was. I said that we no longer charged overdue fines but requested that patrons return books promptly as a courtesy to others. The lady sniffed and said, "Well, if I do not have to pay, I will just keep it for as long as I need." Story 61. My uncle insulted me by implying I work as a prostitute while my dad was on the verge of death. When I was a kid, my uncle really hated me. He kept calling me stupid and disabled because I had severe dyslexia that caused me to think differently than he does. In high school, he would tell me how I would never graduate because of how stupid I was. I ended up graduating with flying colors, earning straight A's. He then started making comments about how I would never graduate college. I graduated college as a top student with a degree in graphic design. I stopped going to family gatherings because I hated seeing him and having him insult me every time he saw me. I haven't been to a family gathering for more than 7 years after college. I had a career change because my parents adopted me when they were 40 to 50 years old, and they aren't getting younger. My dad has a lot of health problems. I became a nurse and a caregiver so I could learn how to take care of my family properly. My dad started to show signs of something going on a few weeks ago. My dad's condition was life-threatening, and I was so stressed and scared that he could pass. During those stressful times, I had to see that uncle for the first time in years. We had a conversation because I wanted to be civil, and then he insulted me by implying I'm working as a prostitute to make money. "I thought you were picking up random guys and getting paid for it to make a living," is what he said. I was genuinely shocked because I had never heard that kind of insult before, and after 7 years of no contact, he still insults me. It didn't affect me as badly as his insults used to because I am more confident in myself from those 7 years without him. Story 62. Worked in a call center providing technical support. My boss's boss saw me at a Starbucks and asked me incredulously, "How can you afford to live in my neighborhood?" Story 63. I know how you feel. My husband had heart surgery. No, you do not know how I feel, as my husband died. I was shocked. Story 64. After having my second child, my mother-in-law, looking at pictures from my wedding, said, "Let's hope you get thin again." Story 65. For a while, I was having bladder issues, and I had to use the restroom frequently and urgently. I received a message from a supervisor that the water would be shut off in our building, and we could use the restroom across the parking lot. I sent a message to the supervisor, asking if I could take calls from our other building a few miles down the road because I needed to be close to a restroom. I received no response. So, I found the first manager I could locate to ask him. He asked why I couldn't go across the parking lot. I explained that would not work. He told me I could go home if I wanted, but I would have to use my paid time off. I replied, "Why? It's not my fault the water is being turned off." He responded, "Well, it's not our fault you have bladder issues. This is a grievance that I will hold until the day I or he no longer work there." Story 66. I have been at my job for about 5 years as the assistant food service director. I thought my boss and I had a good relationship that was quite friendly. I had 2 dogs, and one was already in poor condition, losing her ability to walk and control her bowels, and her quality of life was declining. Then my larger dog, who was 1 year younger, developed a limp. It slowly got worse. My boss got the flu and was out on a Monday and Tuesday. On Monday night, my larger dog's limp got really bad, and he lay down, never able to stand again. I went into work on Tuesday absolutely furious with myself for not calling in and having my dogs put down because my larger dog could not walk and was peeing into a diaper. I knew my boss was sick and needed me, so I chose work over him that day. I texted her, telling her I would not make that decision a second day, and that she needed to figure out the plan for Wednesday because I was putting both my dogs down. I informed her I would probably miss Thursday too since I work for a school and knew every child would ask me where I was on Wednesday, which would result in a lot of crying. She went in on Wednesday feeling about 60% better. An hour and a half after my dogs were put down on Wednesday, I received a text with a single line, "Are you coming tomorrow?" There was no, "Hey, how are you doing? I hope you are okay. I just wanted to check in on you." Just a flat, "Are you coming tomorrow?" I replied, "No. I feel like I'll just be crying every time someone asks me where I was, and it will be all that's on my mind anytime I stop, but I'll come in after school to help with the catering." There was no response to that message at all. I was absolutely furious. I had just watched my 2 best friends of 15 and 16 years die an hour and a half earlier, and she couldn't even ask me if I was okay or say, "I'm sorry." Ever since that day, she has been nothing but a boss to me. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.